So we will begin at 6 p.m. so we can have our full time together. And this evening, we are continuing with our book, A Marvelous Garland of Rare Gems. And we've been reading about, learning about the incredible biographies of masters of awareness in the Dzogchen lineage. Again, this is written by Nyingtik Khenpo. And our time together, I've deemed fireside chats. So we're not having a book review. We are not having anything we have to study. And at the same time, we want to be engaged. We want to be engaging with who these amazing masters are so we can understand what has been handed down to us and also our practices. So it's been a privilege to be able to present these amazing beings. So this evening is Jigme Lingpa, Rigzen Jigme Lingpa. He lived from 1730 to 1798. And at this point, we can reflect on history and maybe the Western world and what was happening there in the 1700s. And then we have this incredible awareness wisdom master who is high in the Himalayas and doing practice. I wanted to mention that there's a couple of other books that both mention and also talk about Jigme Lingpa. There's a chapter in Masters of Meditation and Miracles by Tuku Tandup. I know many of you know about this book. And also there is a book called Apparitions of Self, The Secret Autobiographies of a Tibetan a Visionary by Janet Gyatso. And so that's another book that is about Jigme Lingpa. But this evening, we're going to continue with A Marvelous Garland of Rare Gems because it's so thorough, so deep, and in many ways, mesmerizing. So in one sense, Jigme Lingpa was a being. And then in reading about him, it's also like he's a force of nature. He's an important person in the Longchen Nyingtik lineage, deeply connected. And he wrote a poem in this chapter from pages 203 to 212 in complete praise of Longchen Rabjang, Longchenpa. And we remember Longchenpa from chapter 5 when we reviewed his life. And the name of that poem is called The Queen of Spring Far-Reaching Song. And what's interesting and described in this book is that Jigme Lingpa to praise Longchenpa, and they have a very deep connection. He uses poetry and what's called the 5 fields of knowledge. So again, these are very literate masters, and Jigme Lingpa used the Buddhist teachings, Sanskrit, grammar, logic, the arts, and medicine. And then he dives into incredible experiences with Longchenpa. At one point in the book, it was indicating, and we'll get there, where Jigme Lingpa was Longchenpa. And then later in the book, it talks about them as father and son. And so on page 13, Jigme Lingpa had a instantaneous transmission from Longchen after creating his poem of praise. He was so deeply entrenched in aspiration for the teachings and training and wisdom of Longchen that he had an instantaneous transmission from Jigme Lingpa himself. And it's said that Jigme Lingpa received unerringly, in entirety, the key points of all tantras, explanatory comments, pith instructions, secret Nyingtik, and the teachings of utter lucidity. So all of this came to Longchen instantaneously and spontaneously. And this chapter on Jigme Lingpa totally describes how he just kept receiving all of the transmissions in what's called Dharma, treasures of not just the teachings, but the wisdom mind of Longchen to the point that Longchen was called his spiritual father. So Jigme Lingpa had vision after vision of Longchenpa's Dzogchen teachings, his awarenesses, and what's called his dharmas, these treasures. On page 201, he had a vision of Longchen himself, the omniscient one, gazing at him, gazing at Jigme Lingpa. And Longchen said to Jigme Lingpa in vision, "O child of spiritual heritage, due to your aspirations that you have formulated, I have applied the seal of entrustment and passed down the entirety of the intent of the ultimate lineage to you. And to make a fortress of your practice, teach fortunate people on a vast scale." So all along the way, Longchen is appearing in vision and handing over to Jigme Lingpa the wisdom, the tantras, the pith instructions, and in one experience after another. So for Jigme Lingpa, on the one hand, he was a great master. And I like to say, on the other hand, he was a force of nature. And on page 198, it said, when the teachings of the Dzogchen approach of utter lucidity became adulterated during these mid-1700s, they were adulterated by intellectual speculation. I think we can all understand that. And so it's said that Rigzen Jigme Lingpa consciously took rebirth as the universal monarch, and this is a word used for Longchen, of all of the siddhas. His mind stream, it's hard to believe, was of all of the siddhas, the tertons means those who receive treasures in Tibet, and that there were dharmas of Padmasambhava that predicted the coming of Jigme Lingpa. So it's like, is this a tuku of Longchen? Is this Jigme Lingpa with many mind streams? I had to read these pages many times just to comprehend or open my mind wide enough to receive that. He was born in an area called Yoru, and one of the termas of Padmasambhava, and we remember we did take one evening on Padmasambhava earlier in our text. So one of the termas of Padmasambhava is called the united intent of the guru. And it states, knower of all that can be known, treasure trove of affectionate concern for beings, emanation of Jigme Longchen, treasury of the termas of enlightened mind, yogin of space, the vast expanse of utter lucidity. And this is Padmasambhava speaking. I supplicate the Venerable Jigme Lingpa. So, do not let those teachings become mere intellectual speculations. Otherwise, we're going to have huge mind streams appearing to set us right. So that's what happened in the mid to late 1700s, is that the entirety of the mind stream and Jigme Lingpa, who manifested the ultimate wisdom of many masters and of Longchen himself, appeared. And at the same time, he went for training. And that's just been so startling in each chapter of this book, is these magnificent, radiant beings come into this world, and yet they train. So Jigme Lingpa trained in a shedra, which is a kind of college for Buddhism, and a training center, a school. He became an ordinary monk. And he also, as we said earlier with his poem, studied Buddhism and basic grammar and poetics. He had a guru, and his guru was Tukchol Tsal, and he received teachings, training, empowerments from his guru for 12 years. So once again, he's undergoing training. So this is not somebody who came in and said, I'm the incarnation of Longchen, and I have many beings' mind streams, but he undertook the training once again. So in particular, it said he studied the works of the omniscient Longchen. He had great faith and devotion, and considered Longchen an awakened Buddha. And then Jigme Lingpa spent 3 years practicing in a very special cave. It's called Sangchen Metok Puk. And this is in, and we've heard this place before, Chimpu Uplands. And again, Chimpu is an area above Samye Monastery, the first monastery, as we recall, that Padmasambhava founded in Tibet. And above Samye, and I had the good fortune to go both to Samye and to, it's in some of the time in the book, it's called Chimpu Uplands. Sometimes it's called Samye Chimpu. But anyway, I was very fortunate to go there and to go into some of the caves and to be where Jigme Lingpa practiced. And for those of you who have heard about Azampelu Rinpoche, this is where I met him at Samye Chimpuk. So here's Jigme Lingpa, who is practicing at Chimpuk Uplands. And he was taken under the care, and this is where it becomes, our minds have to really expand. He was taken in the care of timeless awareness embodied both the great master Longchen and the glorious master of Odhyana, Padmasambhava. So he is in retreat and his masters are appearing to him, and that is Longchen and Padmasambhava. So during this time in retreat, he received the legacy of both Padmasambhava and Longchen. And that is very vital in the Longchen Nyingtik lineage. And then we have Jigme Lingpa receiving and carrying that on. So this is the legacy, and from the book itself, calling these teachers superhuman teachers. And we've noticed some of these qualities before. So they demonstrated the natural manifestation of sensory appearances. So they appeared. And then at the same time, these were beings that lived long ago. And Jigme Lingpa in his own biography said that when Padmasambhava and Longchen appeared, that he was freed from blockages in his subtle energy channels. And also especially within his own throat chakra. So again, this body is still opening up. So the vast reservoir of Dharma, of enlightened mind, welled up in him. So when he let go of his own blockages, what welled up was the enlightened mind. He gave voice to Vajra songs. He spoke of these in his own biography. He did his own biography. He had visionary experiences, which we've mentioned. He spoke about secret conversations with Dakinis and the moon dancing on water. Those were his biographies. And he also practiced in an area called Sri Parvate Ling. He had a pure vision of Manjushri Mitra, and we remember him. For those who've been following the book, way back on page 38, Manjushri Mitra was the first disciple of Garab Dorje, the first human to receive the Dzogchen teachings. And so he experienced the finiteness of the indestructible basic space and the unity of awareness and emptiness. He had a vision of a deity who predicted that he would reveal profound dharmas. And then on page 199, Jigme Lingpa had a series of dharmas, and these we hear quite a lot about because Jigme Lingpa, in his own vision, began to bring forth the wisdom and experiences of Longchen Rabjam. So he had one dream where he was in a state of utter lucidity, and he mounted a white snow lioness. And we remember these kinds of experiences from early on in the book where people are able to travel far distances. So Jigme Lingpa mounted a white snow lioness, and he went to the stupa Bodhanath. And some of us have been there in Nepal, and it's the Bodhanath stupa in Bodhanath in Nepal. And so while he was there, there were Dakinis of timeless awareness, and they gave him a gift. And that gift was a flattened wooden urn. It was shaped like a locket. It had edges that were sealed with resin, and it broke open, and 5 scrolls of yellow paper, 7 clear crystals the size of peas. They rolled out, and the first scroll was very fragrant, like fine medicinal plants, like camphor. And he thought that this Dharma was ruled by the Lord Rahula. And we know that name Rahula from our protectors. So here we have Jigme Lingpa, who has a secret scroll given to him by a Dakini ruled by Rahula. And it was written in secret Dakini script. At first, he was unable to understand it. And then he rolled up the paper, and as soon as he did, it transformed itself into Tibetan script. And then there was a whole cycle of sadhanas, of teachings, of practices of Avalokiteshvara, who's the deity of supreme compassion. And so with joy and enthusiasm, he placed one of the crystals that were pea size in his mouth. And then he did have a vision of Rahula, the guardian of these teachings. He then opened another scroll, and he's still circling the stupa in Bodhanath, and then the casket of the enlightened mind, and a record of key points became clear in his mind, which became lucid. And then a woman appeared who he thought was his mother, except this woman would appear to him again in Chimpuk. And she helped to unravel what these teachings were about. And she instructed him to gaze on that which brings liberation upon sight. So this is the first time we've heard that there's actually a way of gazing where liberation upon sight. Then she had him eat the text, and she said these brought liberation of taste. And she told him to eat all of the crystal scrolls that were the size of the peas, and these brought amazement and stamped his mind with the unity of bliss and emptiness. And this happened on a vast scale. And then while he was asleep, he was also immersed in a continual state of utter lucidity. And his teacher, and he's still with his teacher, Tuk Chok Sal, acknowledged incalculable doorways to the Dharma had been opened. He also said it was very important to keep this secret. So he went 3 years more to the cave, which he called Sangchen Pektok Puk, and he had another vision of utter lucidity with Longchen, who chanted, "May the mind of enlightenment, ultimate reality, be passed on to you." So here we have Longchen passing on the whole lineage to Jigme Lingpa. And may the lineage of words that describe the ultimate reality be perfected. And so with great faith and devotion, Jigme Lingpa prayed to Longchen. So he went to a sacred place. Again, he went to, it was called Nyang's Upper Cave. And this we remember from a number of chapters ago, an overhanging cliff where Nyang Tenzin Zangpo practiced. This is way back on chapter 2. And here again, he was on strict retreat. Again, he meets Longchen, who hands him a text saying This clarifies all of the most obscure topics in the Supreme Chariot, and he explained the symbols and the supreme treasury of secrets and gave him a record of all of his lifetimes. So, um, and he must be incredibly strong to bring all of this in and recognize this in his own mind stream. So this was Longchen, letting him know that he now was the omniscient king of Dharma. And so he received enlightened speech. And then Longchen also gave him the authority to write treasures and conferred upon him the empowerment of utter lucidity as a vast array of purity. And Longchen kept appearing to him in different guises. He arose as a young person, an older person, and he gave him the blessings of the enlightened mind and said that he would be a master who realized the ultimate lineage. So again, here he's passing on the whole lineage to Jigme Lingpa. And when he appeared as an older person, he composed a song, and he said, "O Longchen, for you, the treasure trove of enlightened intent welled up within the lucid expanse of being, so that you experience forms, sounds as symbolic teachings and scriptures, and you wear the crown of a vast range of dharmas of the enlightened mind." So at this point, the meeting of Rizin Jigme Lingpa and Longchen is all about the aspects of the enlightened mind. That's what's going on. And then on page 213, Jigme Lingpa receives all of the Dzogchen cycles, and he then goes forward and begins to do what's called codify the sadhanas. He codified the sadhana of Guru Yoga and many of the ones that we do now. And he wrote 9 volumes of collected works. And he was a wandering mendicant for a long time, but then he established a seat at a place called Seringjong. And I also had the opportunity to go to Seringjong, which is a very lovely small temple. It was probably at one time a monastery. And so he built a temple there. And then he traveled all over Tibet. It said he went from west to south to Bhutan to eastern Tibet, and that he began to impart his own Dharma, and he imparted Heart Drop of Longchen. And his students had very strong realizations. And he also codified Vajrakalaya, which is another practice that many people do. And he also began to teach Drupchen. We talked about that in earlier chapters, intensive practice. He also codified peaceful and wrathful deities. Many people do that practice. And then he printed his collected works in gold and silver ink. And during his travels, it said that he brought peace to the borders. And then something very extraordinary happened, that the king and queen of Derge, which is an area of Tibet, funded the publication of Jigme Lingpa's collected works. So what we're talking about really is ink block prints, as you've seen, very long ink block prints, but that was what publishing was at that time. And so because the king and queen of Derge furnished these publications and funded it, then that allowed for everyone far and wide to hear about the teachings of both Longchen and Jigme Lingpa. And as Jigme Lingpa traveled, that is how the teachings that they gave became renowned. It was both from their travels and also for having a benefactor. This is what would be called a benefactor who published these texts. And then they became called the omniscient father and son. So that's when Longchen and Jigme Lingpa were referred to in kind of the same breath. And then in his 70s, amidst marvelous signs, his emanated form, and they're not even calling him a person or a body, but his emanated form resolved back into the palace of Pema-o in the realm of Chamara. And then his disciples were called the 4 Jigmes and the 5 sublime Tukus. And then I'm going to read on page 215 a little bit about who came after Ridzen Jigme Lingpa. So Jigme Lingpa thus came to the end of his life, having ensured that the spontaneous accomplishment of the 2 kinds of benefit as a glorious protector of all of the teachings and all beings, moving fortunate ones to faith, sometime after he reached his 70th year. And again, like I said, amid marvelous signs, his emanated form resolved back into the palace of Pema-o in the realm of Chamara. And then 5 sublime tukus appeared. That of his enlightened form was Jamyang Kensei Wangpo, also a very noted name. That of his enlightened speech was the Bodhisattva Patrul, and we all know who that is, Patrul Rinpoche, words of my perfect teacher. And then of his enlightened mind was Kensei Yeshe Dorje. That of his enlightened qualities was Mingyur Namkai Dorje. That of his enlightened activity was Gyaltse Zenpen Taye. Each of these tukus, whose qualities were so great as to defy descriptions, spread the teachings of the early translation school in the 10 directions. And as for those nurtured by the nectar of Jigme Lingpa's enlightened speech, there was no one of consequence those days in Eastern and Central Tibet who did not sit at his feet. So that's how far he reached. He was honored by an incredible number of students, foremost among them named Dokchen Rinpoche of the Sakya school, leaders of the Shartse, Jangsen College at Ganden Monastery. These are all the different segments of Tibetan Buddhism. Gyaltse Mahapandita of Katok Monastery, Dzogchen Nogun Tenzin Zangpo, the great Buddhist king of Derge, his queen and heirs, and among his main students were the 4 Jigmes, heart sons who held the teachings of the ultimate lineage of inner realization. Dodrup Jigme Tinle Ozer Za Trama Lama Jigme Gyalwe Nugu. We're going to talk about him. Lama Jigme Kunjul Namgyal of Bhutan, Lama Jigme Notsar Tenzin of Getse Monastery. And in turn, each of these had countless students who were lineage holders, spreading the teachings of the heart essence of utter lucidity over the face of the earth. So we are the recipients of this. And so when we read our lineage prayer and when we do our Longchen Nyingtik practices, whether it's Longchen Nyingtik Nuntrao or any of the Longchen Nyingtik practices, we owe everything. I mean, everything to Longchen and Jigme Lingpa. And again, Jigme Lingpa, who was forecasted by Padmasambhava to come in the 1700s to bring the very essence of Dzogchen, the utter lucidity, and to show that one trains, one trains in these practices. So we all have been very blessed by these teachers. And in some way, in reading this book, it's inconceivable. It's just absolutely inconceivable that we've all lived our lives. We've all, come into our own being. And then at the same time, we're on one side of the world, we knew nothing about these teachings, nothing. And now, through predominantly, it's through vision, it's through incredibly well-trained teachers, it's through the faith, it's through the bringing the very depth of being and transmitting that, and then of course supporting that, just like the king and queen of Derge. And so then this was also the first time that we hear about texts. And so then text became more widely available, even though they're all ink prints. They're places that printed these books, manuscripts, and practice pages. So I feel that when we read about Jigme Lingpa and previously Longchen, we are coming into a more refined understanding of how we have received these teachings and where they came from. So thank you. I'm going to end a little early so we can have our unrecorded talk.